A compelling and urgent narrative is gaining traction about the war in Ukraine. It argues that the conflict has evolved from a regional invasion into a covert war by Russia against NATO itself. This perspective, powerfully described in a recent vlog, demands our attention, not just for its conclusions, but for the critical questions it raises. Let's explore this argument, but let's do so with a curious and critical eye, asking the counter-questions that are essential for a full understanding. The narrative posits that Russia is already waging a secret war against NATO members Turkey, Poland, and Romania. It cites a drone strike on a Turkish tanker near Romania and a sabotage operation on Polish railways as clear evidence. This framing shifts the conflict from supporting Ukraine to direct NATO self-defense. While the narrative presents these events as unequivocally orchestrated by the Russian state, how much of this is based on publicly available, irrefutable evidence versus intelligence assessments? In the fog of war, could other actors, for example, Ukrainian partisans, independent Russian units, have motives to conduct such operations to drag NATO in? Is the strike on the Turkish tanker a deliberate signal to NATO, or a tragic consequence of Russia's intensified campaign against Ukrainian logistics, which now heavily rely on the Danube ports near NATO borders? Does one necessarily preclude the other? The narrative lays out a clear pattern: Chechnya, Georgia, Crimea, and now Ukraine. The lesson is that appetite grows while eating. Putin will not stop until he is stopped. Therefore, any sign of weakness or negotiation is an invitation for further aggression. Is historical precedent a perfect predictor? While the pattern is undeniable, does it guarantee future action? Geopolitical contexts change. Could a decisive Ukrainian victory or a fortified NATO eastern flank alter this calculus without requiring a direct NATO-Russia confrontation? If we treat wider war as an inevitability and arm accordingly, does that very posture make such a war more likely? How do we balance deterrence with the risk of creating an inescapable escalatory spiral? The narrative makes two powerful calls to action. First, it argues that preparing for war is not warmongering, but a sad necessity. Second, it makes a stark economic case. Spending 1 to 2% of GDP on arming Ukraine is far cheaper than the economic collapse and reconstruction costs of a wider conflict. The economic argument is compelling on a spreadsheet. But what is the social and political cost of pivoting entire societies, like Germany's, to a war-ready posture after decades of peace? Does this remilitarization risk altering the very character of European democracy? Are we discounting the costs of our own strategy? The narrative rightly highlights the devastating cost of invasion for Ukraine. But is it fully accounting for the long-term cost of a prolonged, high-intensity proxy war? This includes global economic instability, the diversion of resources from climate and social goals, and the risk of a forever war that grinds down Ukraine regardless of the outcome. The argument that we've already invested so much we must see it through is powerful. But at what point does continued escalation risk outcomes that are worse for everyone? How do we define a win? And what does an acceptable, stable end state look that doesn't involve the total collapse of a nuclear power? This narrative is powerful because it is clear, morally charged, and provides a straightforward path forward. Arm Ukraine to the teeth and prepare for the worst. It effectively counters apathy and argues for resolve. However, its clarity may also be its greatest weakness. Geopolitics is rarely a binary choice between good and evil, or between absolute victory and total defeat. The path it advocates, while perhaps necessary, is fraught with immense risk. The most critical question this narrative leaves us with is not about what Russia will do next, but about our own values and risk tolerance. In our justifiable desire to stop an aggressor, are we prepared to manage the world-altering consequences of the very confrontation we seek to avoid? There are no easy answers, but in a situation this grave, asking the difficult questions is not a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate responsibility. What do you think? Does the pragmatic case for overwhelming support outweigh the risks of escalation? Where is the line between necessary deterrence and dangerous provocation?